Hello everyone, I'm Nano, or the person who made Shinobu Freeing and helped, well, if you were reading the title of this video, yeah, I'm explaining why this is my most wanted and why it's the absolute best for both. Now, before I get further into this is my opinion. I want you all to know that. I want to say that before getting any further because I know people are going to disagree, and I'm okay with that. This is just what I think. Like Pyro's other ideas, and say Pyro Bols is mid. I don't care, but I want to at least get my reasoning out for why I like this matchup so much. Now, with all that said, let's get on with the video. So, let's begin this off with my simple history with this matchup 2013 and 2015. Well, let's start with 2013 because this is where the simple stuff comes in. It was the year I was beginning to get into shooters, and one of those shooters caught my attention, that being Team Fortress 2. Oh man, the joy this brought me watching Meet the Merc for the first time. The amount of joy it brought me just watching all of them just introduce themselves or just give a fucking crazy ass analysis of themselves for that matter. And the one Merc that caught my attention the most was none other than the man himself, the Pyro. Or woman, trans, whatever the fuck the Pyro is. And god damn it, I love the concept of the Pyro! Everyone's afraid of him and doesn't see what he sees under that mask. To at least think of everything else about him, that he may have had everything wrong with him. But instead, we see the Pyro as this character who is just wants to be happy. Lives in his own fantasy because he doesn't want to realize what the true world is. However, comics showed us he does know. Sadly. Now, why don't we move on to 2015? A year when I was finally getting into anime. Okay, quick note. Younger me, you are a fucking dumbass! Anyway, back on topic. And the first anime I ever saw was Akame ga Kill, and oh boy, that was one hell of an introduction in anime! And of course, when I was watching this, I fell in love with the pyromaniac, Bols. Bols is just, I don't know the best way to describe him. His appearance is threatening, but he's just shy and pure. Well, pure would be an exaggeration. Bols is pleaded by guilt constantly, but continues on with what he has to do for the Empire because of his family. That's the only thing keeping him around and keeping him going on. I also like how Bols' character is also centered around his family. He has to return to them no matter what, even though we know he will never come back to them. He just wants to go back. Now, I know what everyone here is thinking so far. How the fuck do these two have connections if I mentioned two entirely different characters? Well, I'm gonna start this off simply. Two arsonists who on the outside are viewed as these monsters to everyone but certain people. The Jaegers and the Engineer. Both, while slightly insane, have an understanding of what they do. Bols, knowing karma will come back and bite him for all the wrongs and all the people he's killed. And Pyro, living in his fantasy, knows what the world truly is on the outside. However, both do it for their own reasons. Bols does it for his family, and Pyro lighting things up because of the fantasy he wants to live in. There's also another fun one for me. Both have never truly had their faces revealed by their creators, and are the most unknown in their groups, and all entirely. They contrast in the way of how they both think. The difference is, one acknowledges what they've done is wrong, while Pyro wants to believe he's in the right. Now, I'm gonna go over all of Pyro's other MUs, and I'll give my thoughts on them, or I'll explain them. You can all still like him after the video. I'm not gonna say anything that may convince you otherwise. And so, to start off all of Pyro's ideas, I'm talking about Pyro Jacket, two of my favorite characters of all time, but let's talk about the main thing here. Their dynamic is not great. Their arsenals do not clash, at all. The only way for their arsenals to clash is if you just give them both melee weapons, in which case you're just restricting them both heavily to their whole thing. Now, I also want to mention their main connection. Their main connection is of how they see the world in their own way. Okay, I'm just gonna say it. Jacket does not view the world in his own way, because after you escape the hospital in Hotline Miami, he sees the world again normally instead of the hallucinations he had while in the coma at the hospital. Pyro just sees the world in the fantasy he wants to live in, so that's immediately wrong. So as for an alternative for Jacket, I give you John Wick or Silent Gunner. So I'm just gonna leave it to John Wick since he's my more preferred than Silent Gunner. For me, I prefer John Wick. The connections for John Wick is pretty simple. Both were retired soldiers who were then hitmen who came out of retirement to kill an entire Russian mafia for a specific reason. That being Beard and Daisy. This fight can be done in live action and you can be as creative as possible with this one. Like, you could use their arsenals and clash them off with each other, or just use their environment to their whole advantage. Like, anything can go in this matchup in my opinion. I think Jacket wins due to him being much stronger, and not to mention his whole environment is just creative around him. That, or he can just go straight for the kill on Wick. Now then, next Pyro matchup. No! I'll apologize for my anger there. Our next matchup is Sweet Tooth. So, I did some digging for, the connections for this matchup, and I could not find anything. The only connections I found were from Grandbull's video, so take this with a high-ass grain of salt. Two pyromaniacs who are insane, and also are bound to their fate by some kind of mask. Sweet Tooth is not a pyromaniac. I'm gonna get that out of the way real quick. Listen, just because your fucking head's on fire doesn't make you a pyromaniac. Now, as for the psychos who are bound to their fates by a certain kind of mask, no! Sweet Tooth is just bound to his fate by a certain kind of mask. Pyro chooses to live in a fantasy. What? And aside from that, let's talk about the dynamic. Where's the dynamic? I'm trying to locate it. There's nothing. There's no dynamic. Putting a person who just uses a machete against the person who has a whole arsenal ready to kill you with at a moment's notice of fire. Giving Sweet Tooth his mech doesn't make it any better, considering it can just stop on Pyro despite how fitting it is on paper. It doesn't work. So what about an alternative for him? I don't think Sweet Tooth has to come back like at all. His fight with Joker was too fucking good. But if he had to come back, I'd say Billy Kincaid from Spawn. Connections are simple, being two ice cream men who were never mentally well, and then begin to have their tendencies take them over altogether. And this also led to them both becoming serial killers, so that works perfectly in Sweet Tooth and Billy's favor. As for the fight, it's probably going to have to be a banter fight in my opinion, considering the soothing yet manipulative voice of Billy versus the gritty and just insane tone of Sweet Tooth seemed kind of fun. And once you have like their ice cream trucks like crash into each other, you could probably have them walk out and get into a small fist fight. Only for Needles to grab his machete and then just have him just go constantly to town on Kincaid, just stabbing him constantly, cutting him open all over, just constantly just wanting to make that man suffer. That's just my take all around, but I really don't think Sweet Tooth should return. The next Pyro idea we have is Firefly. This is an idea where I really wish it worked so good on execution. Execution-wise, Pyro really has nothing that can get up with Firefly in the air. And before you say Pyro has a jetpack, what? Pyro's jetpack works like a rocket jump. So that goes out the window for a counter for Firefly. But I do see what people like about it. You can have like their arsenal, well, Pyro's arsenal, just going all at it with Firefly while he's just dodging everything, and then when he gets to the ground, you can have Firefly like use his flamethrower to clash with Pyro for Pyro to get an opening and just run it with an axe or one of his other melee weapons and just go for an attack. Again, this idea works well on paper. It's just execution wise, it doesn't. And that's mostly because Firefly fights in the air because he's a awful brawler. The times I've seen Firefly in a fight was when he's either torching everything what's left, or he's getting ready to get in the air. Also, the connections are just wrong. Firefly does not hallucinate. So him working under someone else was only the one time in the Arkham games, which was Black Mask. So are we compositing Firefly? Or are we just going with comics? So which one are we doing? Also, Pyro is not hallucinating. He's just in his own world where he wants to be happy in. Also, should we really feed Pyro to a DC character? Instead, I give us another Firefly MU. It may not be as good, but it's one that I think is interesting. The Batman 2004 version of Firefly versus the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon version of Beetle. Two characters who use high-tech suits for corporate espionage and have both constantly been shown to be father to the main character. It's like they're a jobber and have almost similar equipment on their suit. Dynamics simple with them both playing off each other in the air, and you could just have them both like ram each other into buildings and such. Also, it's a Firefly win. I'll take that. Next up we have is Dingo Dial. And his only idea is Pyro, unironically. Well, let's look at these connections. I'm sorry, where's the connections? The fuck you mean there's no connections? Are you being fucking serious? There's no connections. Big flamethrowers! That's the only connection! Terribly sorry, but apparently they had more, but Crash 4 debunked that, sadly. So why don't we talk about the dynamic? The dynamic? Pretty fun, but it's just using Pyro's flamethrowers. You don't really get to see him, like, mesh with all of his other arsenals, and Dingo Dial really doesn't mesh well with all of Pyro's arsenal. To realize, the big flamethrower connection can be debunked because Bols has a big flamethrower as well, so what? But anyway, the dynamic here is kinda neat, just the connections are no. So for a legacy battle, I kinda expected this to have a little bit more meat. And our final Pyro MU here is Krieg from Borderlands. This idea seems like a lot of fun. Along with the connection of them both having their own worlds where they play in, well, again, Pyro's is just he chooses to live in a fantasy. But I can see this battle working out, well, if it only had more connections. It basically had mostly a surface level connections along with the connection of them having their own worlds in their heads, which is wrong because Pyro is just in a fantasy. Dynamic-wise, you can do whatever the fuck you want with this fight. Borderlands meshes well off TF2 arsenals along with the wackiness of either of them. I don't really know what else to say here other than dynamic here is just going to be crazy and fun as hell with whatever you give both of them. But those are all my thoughts on Pyro's other MUs besides Bols. Some of these I want to work, some of these I don't get, some of them are fucking asinine and should be swapped out immediately. Some that are just fun dynamic but bad connections in my opinion. Are a good idea. I'm not saying this as I hate all the other ideas. I'm saying this as a person who thinks Bols represents Pyro perfectly. Like, you can like any matchup you like. I don't care. This is just a video of my thoughts. But I think it's best I mention something big. The dynamic between Pyro and Bols, which apparently is mid. But I'll leave a Google Doc explaining all the dynamic you can have with this fight and how creative it can get for both of them. Now, there are some small problems for Bols, that being that he's not well known and he doesn't have a 3D model, but I think that one can be worked around pretty easily considering, well, look at Bols, he's easy to make a 3D model for, and Bols is not well known at all, so this would affect it as well. meaning Firefly and Dingodile would have a higher chance, sadly. But, again, this is my take, and this is what I believe. I think Bols is the best idea for Pyro you can get, but I can understand why people like Pyro's other ideas, I'll admit it. But I'll be happy for my friends still. I'll be happy for my friends if Pyro fights someone else. I'll be a little sad, but I'll suck it up because I like all the ideas. But that's my take. I think Bols has what you need for a Pyro MU all the way. And with that said, I'm ending this video off. I hope you all have a good night and a good day, wherever you're watching this. Till then, see y'all around. I figured this was last leaving out of the video, but I also commissioned the track for the end. Just a small update at the end.